Hey everybody, and welcome back to Fed News, the November to December edition. Let's get started. So, the Pit Bulls of ECW fame, it's Gary Wolf and Anthony Durante, are actually in talks to join UWA Developmental. However, no one's signed this week with UWA Developmental. Hopefully next week. So, week one kicks off with the Undisputed Era versus Moose, Eric Young, and Tatanka, ending in a brawl. The referee threw the match out. Raven defeats Trevor Murdoch by pinfall. The main event sees Paul Orndorff defeat Austin Theory to retain his hardcore title. Over to Nitro now, as Juventud Guerrera defeats Don Marco by pinfall. Alex Wright defeats Lance Cade by pinfall. Mike Kanellis and the Hurricane ends in a time limit draw. Crash Holly defeats Roderick Strong by pinfall. And the main event sees Cassius Ohno defeats Bam Bam Bigelow by pinfall. The reason why, so over to SmackDown now, Ezekiel Jackson and Carl Anderson defeat Norman Smiley and Reggie by pinfall. Mr. House Billy Gunn defeats Giant Gonzalez by pinfall. And Road Dogg Jesse James becomes the new UWF Hardcore Champion by beating Big Boss Man in the main event. Over to Raw's Jake Gemini defeats Roddy Piper. Larry Sabisco defeats Johnny Gargano by pinfall. LOD defeats Simon Diamond and A-Train by pinfall. Cesaro defeats Jey Uso, Brian Pillman, and Bob Backlund to earn an Intercontinental title shot match again. And the main event sees Brian Knobbs defeats Spike Dudley. Now this was an interesting one because the Survivor Series team of Spike, Owen, Shinsuke, and Chris Candido won, they all have the opportunity to try to challenge Cody for the title. However, Cody promised Brian Knobbs after losing his partner because he lost that final deciding factor. So the deal is if Brian Knobbs defeats the opponent 4 weeks in a row, then they will not be allowed to fight for the title. So it could either become a one-on-one match, or it could be a 6-pack, or it could be a 5-pack challenge, or a fatal 4-way, or a triple threat. Brian Knobbs defeats Spike Dudley to keep him out of the hunt. The UCW match card for Starrcade, though, is Andre the Giant looks to take on Randy Orton. King Kong Bundy versus Kurt Angle for the TV title. Motor City Machine Guns versus Harlem Heat versus Rock and Roll Express in a triple threat tag match. Rhino versus Hardcore Holly for the U.S. title. Doug Furnas and Phil LaFron get a chance at the Highlanders for the tag titles. Highlanders won the belts last month. And Sting versus Zeus. The main event will see Macho Man Randy Savage going after Big Show after losing his belt at Sin. He gets an automatic rematch because he won that best of 7 series to earn that opportunity. So Thunder kicks off with Undisputed Era defeating Moose, Tatanka, and Eric Young. Test defeats Rey Mysterio by pinfall. Raven defeats Paul Orndorff to become the Hardcore Champion again. And Power and Glory defeat Chronic to retain the USA Tag Team Championship. And on to Starrcade, Sting opens up by defeating Zeus by pinfall. Kurt Angle defeats King Kong Bundy by submission. Randy Orton defeats Andre the Giant by pinfall. Doug Furnas and Phil LaFron are now your new Tag Team Champions defeating the Highlanders. Rhino defeats Hardcore Holly to get the belt off of Hardcore Holly. Motor City Machine Guns defeats Harlem Heat and Rock and Roll Express by pinfall. They are now the new number 1 contenders for the tag belts. In the main event, Big Show retains his title over Macho Man Randy Savage. Macho, of course, at the press conference afterwards announcing that he is taking a month off to heal up from nagging injuries. Over to week 2 now as Chronic defeats Lance Cade and Trevor Murdoch. They make their first debut. They'll actually be known as Cade and Murdoch going forward when they team up. Undisputed Era defeats Moose, Ken Shamrock, and Muhammad Ali by pinfall. And main event sees Raven defend his title over Paul Orndorff. Over to Nitro, Stevie Ray defeats Don Morocco. The Hurricane versus Test ends a double countout. Rock and Roll Express versus the Highlanders end in a double DQ after Motor City Machine Guns interfered. Booker T defeats Mike Kanellis by pinfall. And Sting defeats Randy Orton to become the new UCW World Heavyweight Championship number 1 contender. SmackDown kicks off with Hart Dynasty defeating the Singh Brothers by pinfall. Simon Dean defeats Psychosis by pinfall. And the Road Dogg retained over the Big Boss Man. Over to Raw now as Randy Rose and Tyson O'Neil defeated LOD. Brian Pillman defeats Jerry Lynn. Marty Jannetty defeats Yokozuna by countout. Sylvain retains his international championship. And the main event sees Brian Knobbs defeat Owen Hart by pinfall, meaning he is no longer able to fight for that world title at Armageddon. Over to week 3 now as Thunder kicks off with Lance Cade and Trevor Murdoch versus Eric Young and Tatanka ends in a time limit draw. Austin Theory and Rey Mysterio defeated Redragons, that's Bobby Fish and Kyle O'Reilly by pinfall. And the main event sees Adam Cole defeat Raven to become the Hardcore Champion. Over to Nitro now as Booker T defeats Andre the Giant by pinfall. Bam Bam Bigelow defeats King Kong Bundy by pinfall. The Highlanders defeat Rock and Roll Express by pinfall. Test defeats Hurricane by pinfall. And Kurt Angle retains his television title over Stevie Ray in the main event by submission. Over to SmackDown now as Rick Rude defeats Kevin Sullivan, as Eagle Jackson and Carl Anderson defeat the Hart Dynasty by pinfall. And Bull Buchanan defeats the Road Dogg to become the new Hardcore Champion, finally his first taste at some singles gold. Over to Raw now as Johnny Gargano defeats Spike Dudley by submission. Simon Diamond defeats A-Train by pinfall. Jey Uso defeats Larry Zbyszko. Bob Backlund actually defeats Roddy Piper by knockout, actually putting him in the crossface chicken wing. He refused to submit. He passed out from the pain. Turns out he actually got injured and will be out for who knows how long. In the main event sees Chris Candido defeat Brian Knobbs by pinfall. So he actually is now in. It's now at least a triple threat match for the world title at Armageddon. On to week 4 now as Eric Young and Tatanka defeat Cade Murdoch by pinfall. Rey Mysterio, Paul Orndorff, and Ken Shamrock defeat Reed Dragons and Austin Theory by pinfall. And Raven, having the right to fight for his hardcore title again, defeats Adam Cole and regains the hardcore championship relatively quickly. It was a short reign for Adam Cole, but who knows what's up ahead in the future for him. Over to Nitro now as Roderick Strong defeats Alex Wright by pinfall. Test defeats Cassius Ohno by pinfall. Zeus defeats Don Morocco by pinfall. Crash Holly and Juventud ends in a time limit draw. And the main event, Bam Bam Bigelow defeats Randy Orton by pinfall. Over to SmackDown as Samir Singh defeats Sneal Singh and Tyson Kidd by pinfall. Mr. Ross Billy Gunn defeats Big Boss Man by pinfall. And the Road Dogg, Jesse James, defeats Bull Buchanan to win back the hardcore title. Titles changing fast and furious down the hardcore division. But over to Raw, though, as Jake Gemini defeats Brian Pillman by pinfall. Simon Diamond defeats Johnny Gargano by pinfall. Randy Rose defeats Jerry Lynn by pinfall. Owen Hart defeats Sylvain by submission to become the new international champion. He's now a two-time international champion. And Shinsuke Nakamura defeats Brian Knobbs. So it's now going to be a fatal four-way at the Armageddon pay-per-view. And kicking over to the pay-per-view, and here's what the UFC match card looks like. Bob Backlund versus Marty Jannetty. Sylvain versus Owen Hart for the international title. Brian Knobbs versus... Whoops, that's Brian Pillman. Sorry, that was not supposed to be the case. Brian Pillman versus Jerry Lynn. Braun Breaker versus The Fiend. Wait, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Something happened there. I do apologize for that. But Braun Breaker and The Fiend versus Heath Slater and Justin Gabriel. Brian Pillman versus Jerry Lynn. Cesaro versus William Regal. What am I missing? Well, Brian Knobbs versus Shinsuke Nakamura versus Chris Candido versus Cody Rhodes for the world title. Now, of course, on to SmackDown here as the Hart Dynasty defeats Big Boss Man and Bull Buchanan by pinfall. Samir Singh defeats Psychosis from the new light heavyweight champion. The Dudley Boys versus Carl Anderson and Ezekiel Jackson ends in a double countout, so they retain by countout. And Mr. Ross Billy Gunn defeats Road Dogg Jesse James by pinfall to become the new hardcore champion. Over to Armageddon, though, as Bob Backlund defeats Marty Jannetty by submission. Owen Hart defeats Sylvain by submission to retain his belt. Oh, because the typo is actually Jey Uso versus Simon Diamond was a last-minute replacement. Braun Breaker and The Fiend defeated Justin Gabriel and Heath Slater by pinfall. Jey Uso, of course, card is subject to change. Jey Uso actually, in an impromptu match, took on Simon Diamond, defeating him in a rather quick match. Cesaro defeats William Regal by pinfall, become the new Intercontinental Champion. Jerry Lynn defeats Brian Pillman by last man standing match. In the main event, Shinsuke Nakamura defeats Brian Knobbs, Chris Candido, and Cody Rhodes, dethrones Cody Rhodes, who's been on a huge title defense. Unfortunately, the Fatal 4-Way was just too much. Shinsuke, of course, beating Brian Knobbs to become the new champion, not beating Cody. So Cody will take on Shinsuke at the next pay-per-view since he has the right for one title rematch. So with that being said, your UWF champions now, and a whole new change-up here is you've got Shinsuke, you've got Cesaro as the Intercontinental, The Fiend and Braun Breaker become tag champs once again. Owen Hart's now the international champion. No longer Psychosis, the lightweight champion is now Samir Singh. Mr. Ass becoming the hardcore champion. The Dudleys retaining their titles. Over to UCW as Big Show continues to hold on to that belt. Rhino becoming the new U.S. champion. Doug Furnas and Phil LaFromme working their way up to become tag champions. Kurt retaining the TV title. Rey Mysterio still the cruiserweight champion. Raven becoming the hardcore champion again. And Power and Glory holding on to those USA tag team titles. That's all for this week. Check back next week as we go through the next month, which will also include the Royal Rumble and Resurrection and bragging rights. That's right. The companies will go head-to-head again in a bragging right situation. Stay tuned for what the stipulations will be for that one. And remember, as always, the losing brand has to have someone fired randomly. So will WCW join... Or WCW, will UCW join the UWF and losing somebody, or will UWF lose another person and be down two? This, of course, is important because when it comes down to the all-out war at the very end of this year, you're going to have the gigantic 50 on, however, it's supposed to be 50 on 50, but obviously it could be 49 to 49 or 48 to, or 40, what was it, 48 to 50. So who knows? Stay tuned for that one next week.